But in most situations, people have not been discipled into a life of wholehearted devotion to God, where they give up everything. The days of St. Anthony of Egypt, look up St. Anthony of the desert. The days of wealthy people saying to their parents, I want to give all my inheritance away and just live for the Lord. And then St. Anthony of the desert, he's one of these guys who went out into a cave and ended up spending 25 years in a cave just to get away and pray. And when he walked out of that cave 25 years later, emperors wanted to hear him speak. Rumors of the power of God on the cave, as you drew near to the cave that St. Anthony of Egypt was in, the rumors of the power, the rumors were so powerful that other believers came and started finding caves nearby and trying to spend the time in prayer like St. Anthony of Egypt was doing. And once a month or every so often, there was a guy, Athanasius, who would bring St. Anthony some bread and some water to keep him going or whatever food he was using while he was in this cave. And people would come with Athanasius, who's responsible for what we now call the Athanasian Creed. Athanasius would show up with food and give it to St. Anthony, and people would gather just to get a glimpse at St. Anthony of Egypt. His whole life, 25 years in a cave. Rumors spreads that when he came out of that cave, emperors wanted to talk to St. Anthony of the desert. Today, it's just not like that. What do we have today? We've got TV stars. We've got a lot of things that they call churches. But there's so much division. I was talking to a guy and he said, I'm believing for revival in the state where we're at. And I said, okay, that sounds good. I think that's what that is the natural state of God, is revival. So if we're not having revival, it's only because something in us is in the way. Our flesh, division in the body, carnality, immaturity. So I said, if you want revival, that is the will of the Lord, because he is revival. God himself is revival when he's unleashed, when we get out of his way. So that's good. I said, let me ask you a question. In this great revival that you want to see come across your state, I said, are the Catholics involved in this? How about the Methodists? How about, and this person was a non-denominational person. I said, so you mean to tell me that there's 300,000 Catholics who name the name of Jesus, but your revival is not going to include them because you have theological differences with them? Okay. What about the Charismatics? What about the Baptists? What about the Methodists? Are they invited into this giant revival? Or is it only the pimps, prostitutes, and lost people who you want to lead to Christ, which we need them too, right? God is after souls. But is this revival going to include all of the believers, all of these things that we call churches, or just the people who think like you and the people who you guys lead to Christ? Now, these are the types of conversations that get the cops called on you. So be careful. I warn you, I am a professional at this. I don't like to boast in being a professional and having the cops called on me by church pastors. But the fact is that the fear of the Lord is terrifying. And when the fear of the Lord shows up, all kinds of stuff goes haywire. I've had a knife pulled out on me. I've had a gun pulled out on me in my life, not from a pastor, but in my life. When you boldly proclaim the gospel and confront powers and principalities and demons, inevitably manifestations occur. And sometimes the manifestations are so chaotic and crazy that to try to explain it to somebody later, it just doesn't make sense. My friend says, my grandma always told me you can't make sense out of nonsense. Listen, when the devil starts really manifesting, you can't make sense out of nonsense. You can't make sense out of nonsense. We were preaching the gospel one time out in public in front of a Starbucks in a beach area. And as all I was doing, the Lord told me specifically that day, just read one of my best sermons ever, the Sermon on the Mount. So I got up, and it wasn't even my own preaching. I literally was just declaring as though I was Jesus standing there. I was declaring, had the Bible out. I was just reading the Beatitudes out loud as my message. And as I did, a man began to manifest, and before we knew it, there was punches being swung. I'm jumping away, trying to get away from this guy, and yet still preach the gospel to him. It was a mini riot occurred. The police got called. None of us got hurt. There was a guy who was arrested, and he had been drinking. He had been at a nearby bar, but he was manifesting. And so when you are devoted, wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord, you're just going to have these events happen. And if a majority of the body barely prays, if a majority of the body still thinks that church is this place where you go to on Sunday, where you give it a name, and a lot of them aren't going to understand when the real fire of God breaks out and chaos begins. When governors are confronted, when mayors are confronted, when police chiefs are confronted with their corruption, when the gospel begins to transform the society, let me tell you what happens. We have the evidence in the book of Acts. The armies have to get involved.
You're the one the angels cry out to. You're the one the elders cast their crowns before. You're the one the angels cry out to.